video, we're going to explore basic standard input. Standard input allows us to read data from the keyboard into our program so that we can store it or use it in calculations. Using standard input in our program requires multiple steps, and we're going to look at the syntax for each of them. The first step is importing the required library into our program. The second step is instantiating the scanner class, which is provided in the API and makes standard input possible. The third step is to use the various methods that are part of the scanner class to actually read in the data from standard input and store it in our program. And then finally, when we're done using our scanner, we should always close it before we end our program. You can see an example program that includes all four of these steps in the class notes. Let's talk in more detail about what each of these individual steps means. The first step is to include the library that's needed in order to use standard input in our program. This library is the java.util library. You can find more details about it in the Java API. Remember, you can always Google search for Java, then the version number that we're using, and then the name of the class that you want to explore. In this case, the class name is Scanner. In the API documentation, it will always give you the location of that class within the Java standard library. Here it tells us that the scanner class is located in the Java util library. So that's what we need to import into our program. Let's look at the example program for placement. So you can see that the import statement always goes at the top of the program. It's the very first thing that you type in there. So I'm saying import the entire Java utility library. Remember, I'm using a wildcard character that means import all of the contents of the utility library. If you only want to include a certain portion of it, you can include that after the dot instead of using the wildcard character. The next thing that we need to do in the program is to instantiate the scanner class so that we're able to use the data type in our program to read from standard input. In Java, the line that instantiates the scanner class always will look like this. Have the name of the data type, scanner, and then the identifier that you select for it. In my programs, I always use the identifier stdin for standard input, but you can call that whatever you want. Then you need to include the assignment operator. And then finally, on the right-hand side of the assignment operator, you'll want to use the reserved word new, and then the data type again, scanner. And then inside the parentheses, include system.in. That's what tells Java to read from standard input. That line of code looks a little bit strange and might take some getting used to. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the details so we can understand what's happening in our program. When we include the line that creates the scanner, we're instantiating the scanner class. Instantiate is just a fancy object-oriented programming term that means that we're going to declare a variable whose data type is defined by a class. Anytime that you instantiate a variable, you use this format for the declaration. You include the name of the class, then the identifier for your variable, then use an assignment operator, the reserved word new, and then finally the data type with parentheses and a semicolon at the end. Sometimes you include arguments inside these parentheses, and that was the case with our scanner method call. So remember, to instantiate the scanner, use the data type scanner, then pick your identifier that you'd like to use for that. I use stdin, then use the assignment operator, say that you're making a new scanner object, and then tell it the details that are needed. In this case, you're telling it that you want to use standard input. Let's look at this next example. Do you think this would also be a valid instantiation of the scanner class? Remember, you can always test things out in IntelliJ if you're not sure. In this case, this is a valid instantiation of the scanner class. I used exactly the same input that I used in the previous example. The only thing that was different was that I called the scanner object something different. And you have the freedom to choose any identifier there that you want. You don't have to use stdin. The third step for using standard input is to actually call the methods that are part of the scanner class. We're going to explore several methods that allow us to read information from standard input. We'll need a different method for different types of information. In this class, we're primarily going to use these three methods from the scanner class. The first one is called next, and that method allows us to read in a single string. Whenever you're reading information using the method called next, it automatically stops whenever it encounters white space. So that might be a space, or it might be a carriage return at the end of your input line. We're also going to use the method called nextInt. That allows you to read a single integer. Again, it looks for white space to delimit the integer from the surrounding text. And then finally, we'll often use the method next double that allows us to read a floating point value from standard input and store it in our program. If you want to see more details about the individual methods that are part of the scanner class, you can read about them in the Java API. Let's pull up the Java API now. So I'm going to search for Java API version 20, and we're looking at the scanner class. Remember that every page in the API has a standard format, and so it always starts with general information about the class, provides some context and examples, and then if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, there is a section called Method Summary. That's the part that tells us all the various operations that are provided for this particular class. And if you keep scrolling, you'll see that there are the methods that I was just talking about. The next method tells us that it finds and returns the next complete token from the scanner, and it returns a string object. So it's used to read in string data types. You can also see the method in here for the next double. It scans the next token from input and reads it as a double. And then finally, next int, again, it tells you it stores it scans through the next token of input and stores it as an integer. You can see that there's lots of additional methods in here that can be used as part of the scanner class. You are very welcome to use any of them in your programs. You just need to read about them so that you understand the context. Before we run our example, let's look at the last line that's required for using standard input in your program, and that's the statement that closes the scanner once you're done using it. I always include that as one of my last lines in my main program, right before I'm ending the execution of my program. To close the scanner, you just include the name of your scanner. Again, mine's called stdin. That's what I declared up at the top. And then the method to close the scanner is just simply close with empty parentheses. Let's test out this example program using IntelliJ. I'm going to modify my previous program, the one that we used for standard output. So in this one, I declared my 3 scores. And then rather than hard coding those values in, I'm going to retrieve them from a scanner. So remember, the first thing that I need to do in my program is to import the correct library. And the standard library that does standard input is java.util. Once I've imported that library, now I'm able to declare a scanner object. I'm going to call mine stdin. And I want to read from standard input, so I'm going to put system.in inside those parentheses. Now I want to retrieve a data value from standard input and store it into my score variable. I'm going to say score equals stdin.nextInt. Whoops, score 1. So, and then I'm going to do the same thing for my 2 other scores. Score 2 equals stdin.nextInt. And score 3 equals stdin.nextInt. You can see that if I ever don't type something exactly right, Java will highlight it in red to draw my attention there. Also usually pops up a little button that provides more details if you need some tips on how to fix the error. In this case, I was just missing a T. Let's run our program and see what happens. So you can see when I'm running my program, it looks like nothing's happening here, but really it's executing my program. It's declared the memory space for score 1, the space for score 2, the space for score 3, and it has instantiated my scanner object. At this point, it's executing line 13 where it's waiting for me to type in a score. So I could type in something like 100, then score 2 is 90, and then score 3 is 80. And you can see that once I've typed in that data, then it's able to continue on with the program and print out my output. Now, of course, it's not very user-friendly to just expect the user to know what to type in. Typically, when you're using standard input in Java, it's important to include some output statements that prompt the user to enter information. So before I expect the user to type in score 1, I should probably include an output statement that says something like, please enter score 1. I didn't include that in the notes just to save space, but it is always important to include a prompt for the input before you expect the user to be able to type it in. So I'm also going to add a prompt for score 2 and then a prompt for score 3. we'll see how that changes the interaction with the end user. So now when I'm running the program, it prints out my first prompt, please enter score 1. And now it's waiting for me to type something. So I could type in 100. Now it's waiting for me to type in the value for score 2. Maybe that's a 50. And then it's waiting for me to type in the value for score 3. Let's say that's a 99. Then once we have those data values, it's able to continue on with the program. Remember that you can adjust your input and output statements however you want to get the format that you'd like. So for example, if you wanted the user to be able to type the value 100 right next to the number 1 in the prompt, please enter score 1, you could do that by just not including the new line character there. Let's try that out. I'm deleting all my print LNs and just making them prints. Now it's going to say, please enter score 1. I can type in my 100. And then it's going to ask me to enter score 2. I can enter 50. And then score 3, I can enter the 99. So either way, it reads the data in the same manner. It changes how it displayed to the screen. And of course, if you wanted to add spaces in here, you could do that after each of my individual prompts. That would probably make it look even prettier so that when I run it, I'm able to type the value and it doesn't look like it's smooshed into the label, please enter score 1. Excellent. Now there's one thing that I didn't include in my example program. I did include the statement where I import the library so that I'm able to use the scanner class. I instantiated my scanner object and created the object called stdin. I used the nextInt method so that I could read data from standard input. The thing that I didn't do was close the scanner when I was done using it. You saw nothing horrific happened when I was running my program. It ran just fine and still exited with the normal code. However, it's best practice to close up your scanner whenever you're finished using it. Let's just see how adding the stdin.close method call changes our program's output. At this point, we've looked at all 4 of the steps required to use standard input in your program. You can explore using standard input more and test out different mechanisms that allow you to create just the input sequence that you want.